The Legend of Zelda is a video game series that has provided me and my family with genuine entertainment for years. The first game that comes to mind is Ocarina of Time for the N64, because that's the one that I grew up with. It had decent gameplay, good characters, a simple yet impactful story to follow, and some pretty memorable dungeons. Except for the Water Temple, of course. But hey, at least the Water Temple had one of the best mini-bosses. Though it is disappointing that this wasn't the final boss. But when I take my nostalgia glasses off, even I have to admit that it's not the best Zelda game. That award obviously goes to Wind Waker HD. Yarg! Avast ye mateys, let us sail the seven seas, destroy all the scallywags, and plunder their sunken treasure. I'm sorry, but I can't talk about this game without talking like a pirate. It's obvious to most people that every Zelda game has their own identity that sets them apart from each other. Majora's Mask has a much darker feeling. Minish Cap had colorful sprites and animation. Twilight Princess has the darkest story in the franchise, as well as the best companion character for Link. Wind Waker has the best feeling of adventure. Breath of the Wild is the greatest open world game in history with much more directions for gameplay. For example, if you say that you don't like shield surfing, then you are lying! And there are people out there that say that Skyward Sword is, for some reason, the worst Zelda game in the franchise. Motion controls suck, it looks bad, it's so linear. Well, I have to respectfully disagree. Skyward Sword is not the worst Zelda game. The worst Zelda game is Phantom Hourglass. Although I do understand some of the gripes people have with this game. The motion controls are a little awkward sometimes, and I've found myself recentering the gyro a few times. Other than that, it was a pretty solid game. But now, pop in the new HD version for the Switch. Holy crap! 1080p, 60 FPS, the motion controls aren't any better. Yeah, the motion controls haven't improved much at all. It is a lot smoother, yes, but I've recentered the gyro in this version more than in the original Wii version. It's not too huge of a problem since you recenter the gyro with just a push of the Y button, but it's still noticeable. The most trouble that I've had with the motion controls is whenever I'm crossing tightropes. Like, you see this? Right here, I have my right Joy-Con tilted to the left as hard as I can, and yet Link is staying over on the right. Luckily, the Switch version is much more accessible to people. People that prefer the motion controls can choose to stick with it, but people that were annoyed with the motion controls, or prefer to play with a Pro Controller, or own a Switch Lite, can now play this game with button controls. Even though the majority of my first playthrough of the Switch version was with the motion controls, I've tried the button controls a fair amount as well. And the button controls are actually pretty solid. You use swinging motions with your sword and items using the right control stick, and you don't need to use motion controls for a few other things too. Plus, it's pretty hilarious to watch Link swing his sword rapidly in one direction. The only downside to using button controls is that it sacrifices manual control of the camera, and you have to use the classic Z targeting function to move the camera directly behind Link. And with the controls aside, I am out of bad things to say about this game. By utilizing Skyward Sword's controls, Nintendo has been able to take the gameplay of the standard Zelda formula in all new creative directions. When fighting with a sword, enemies will block you, so you have to swing in the opposite direction of their defense. You can roll bombs, you can jostle enemies on tightropes, when it works for you, of course. This game inspired the sprinting mechanic that is later used in Breath of the Wild, as well as shield durability. Sup, fellas? Whoosh! And yeet! Back attack! As any other standard Zelda game, your sword isn't your only tool. You've got a remote control beetle that can drop bombs. You've got a freaking shotgun slingshot, the classic bow and arrow, and the whip. Oh my gosh, I love the whip. And of course, we cannot forget about the best Zelda item of all time, Leaf Blower. You blow dust. As well as some other stuff. But even more important than the items is where you get them and how you use them. Enter The dungeons. A Zelda game just wouldn't be a Zelda game without dungeons, and I think some of the best dungeons in the series comes from this game. The Earth Temple, where you ride on top of a boulder to get across lava, and you later run away from a boulder like in Indiana Jones, and it turns out that the boulder is actually the dungeon's boss, which turns out to be Mike Wazowski. The Lanayru mining facility, where you need to use time shift stones to access areas easier, and you even get to play bomb basketball.
Pulls up, three-pointer, bang! Bang! It's good! Wins the game at the buzzer!
Now, there's some good dungeons and some really good dungeons in here, but I believe the best dungeons are the ones that completely shift your expectations, which brings us to the Ancient Cistern. This is where the stars align. It starts out looking colorful and mostly unimposing. You've got the typical bokoblins and more spiders. This dungeon introduces sword strike locks, and this is the dungeon where you get the whip, which would automatically make this the best dungeon in the game anyway. Whack away at a bokoblin with your whip until he just falls down a pit. You turn these plugs that block pipes to get the water flowing. It seems all happy and green up here. You think, how could things get any worse? Easy. Going down. There's a part of the dungeon where eventually you have to go down to where the boss key is, and where you end up is not what you expect. You're surrounded by bones and muck, and the music turns evil. And there's these zombie bokoblins down here that don't seem to die very easily. And then you have to climb up to where a switch is to raise the giant statue that's blocking the way to the key, but as soon as you grab the rope, oh crap. Get up there! Get up there! Ah! Get off of me! Get off of me! You pull the lever up, then you go back down. Grab the key, and you're surrounded again, and the statue starts to lower again, so you're like, I officially don't like this place! Oh, that wasn't so bad. And then you climb up to the dungeon's boss. A robot possessed by an undead spirit. What the crap? I'ma stab you in the heart, buddy.
He's got a sword! You idiots! We've all got swords!
Oof, that's disarming. Open wide, you stupid idiot. You're dead, and you're supposed to stay dead. Oh hey, I can still use his swords. All of that was an entire dungeon. Ancient Cistern, 10 out of 10, masterpiece of a dungeon. But of course, the dungeons are not the only places in the game to get cool stuff. Outside the dungeons, in the multiple locales that you visit, there will be other things to occupy your time, like looking for heart pieces and goddess cubes, shopping, and chatting with the multiple colorful and unique characters throughout the game. You've got the potion shop, the item shop where I only buy shields and nothing else, the item storage, and the scrap shop where you repair and upgrade your shields and items. I guess there's also the fortune teller, but I've hardly visited this guy other than help him get another crystal ball to replace the one that he accidentally breaks. And then there's Beetle. This dude flies around in a shop that is somehow pedal operated. Beetle sells some of the most useful things in the game, but they are also really expensive. This is good in a way because it gives you incentive to spend your rupees, but I can't help but feel like this dude has a criminal record. Not only does he raise the prices on items that he eventually restocks, but if you choose not to buy anything, he tries to kill you. But whatever, you get gratitude crystals later on in the game for helping him get his pet beetle back, so I'm not complaining. Which brings me to my next topic. What was it called again? Oh yeah, side quests. Skyward Sword has some of the most creative side quests in any Zelda game, such as a quest where this dude named Crawlin wants you to deliver a love letter, and this quest can go one of two ways. You can actually give the love letter to the girl of his dreams, or you can give the letter to this ghost hand that's been in the Night Academy bathroom at night. The outcome, either way, is hilarious. Or a side quest where Fledge, this weakling right here, wants to get physically stronger. So you help him out by giving him basically steroids, and the outcome to that is also hilarious. And you unlock a pumpkin shooting minigame, which I suck at. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding? Are you freaking... And then there's a side quest where you go back and fight all the bosses again in this boss rush mode with no breaks, you can't use potions, and the boss selection is always randomized. And the rewards vary depending on how many bosses you beat in a row. However, the one thing that you want from this side quest is the iconic Hylian shield, which you get after defeating 8 bosses in a row. In all honesty, my favorite side quest in the game involves the Lumpy Pumpkin restaurant. After screwing around in it and breaking the chandelier all just to get a heart piece, the boss of the joint asks you to work for him for free until you can pay off the chandelier. This quest involves a delivery, harvesting pumpkins, and eventually playing your harp with Kina, aka one of the cutest girls in the history of the Zelda series. Go ahead and try and convince me that there's a better girl in The Legend of Zelda, other than Zelda herself. And Malon, I guess. I guess she counts. Which actually brings up the next topic of the game, story. However, if you haven't played a Skyward Sword before, I recommend that you do before watching any Let's Plays. So, you know, spoiler warning. Skip to this part of the video if you don't want anything spoiled for you. 3, 2, 1, here we go. Skyward Sword is the first game chronologically in the Zelda timeline. Now, you may be thinking, Flaming Ninja Gamer, nobody cares about the timeline. It's so screwed up and might as well not exist. Well, you'd be right about that, but Skyward Sword being the first in the timeline actually makes sense, because the game is centralized around one theme: awakening. Link waking up to a surprise Loftwing letter, Zelda awakening her memories as the goddess, the imprisoned awakening multiple times, the goddess sword's awakening as the true Master Sword, Fi awakening as the spirit of the Master Sword. The whole game is all about waking up. All of this backed up by thoughtfully realized characters, starting with Link himself. At the beginning of the game, Link starts off as this aloof, clear-headed kid with his head in the clouds, but eventually grows and finds within him the hero that he was meant to be. Link is the rare example of a hero where actions speak louder than words, because we never hear him talk, but his actions speak for him. Even the simplest things like his facial expressions. You can tell when he's happy, when he's angry, when he's focused, when he's disappointed. All of these emotions are more realized in Skyward Sword. And then there's Zelda. In Skyward Sword, Zelda is not a princess, and is Link's pushy childhood friend as well as his obvious romantic interest. And this game's Zelda is seen much more as an actual character, rather than just, bruh. But she's much more than that. Later on in the game, you realize that Zelda is actually the goddess reborn as a mortal. She gave up her previous form in order to keep the imprisoned in its seal, and eventually puts herself in a deep sleep until Link can recover the Triforce and ultimately seal away the imprisoned, which, by then, Zelda would wake up because the world is finally at peace. Of course, turning mortal wasn't the only part of the goddess's plan. Fi is the spirit of the Master Sword, created by the goddess to aid Link in his journey. She's a companion that offers helpful advice and is quite strategic when doing so. Sometimes a little too strategic, but I'm not too nitpicky. Fi is a companion character that I've grown very fond of. She's somewhere in the middle of not as annoying as Navi, but not as good as Midna. Even though she's just doing her job and she goes into a sleep without end once she's fulfilled her purpose, you still feel bitter sorrow as you eventually have to say goodbye to her. But not before she expresses that with all the time that she's spent with Link, she's felt genuine happiness for the first time in her life. This absolutely got me and made me actually tear up the first time I completed this game years ago on the Wii. However, the game has another thoughtfully realized character in mind, and that's Groose. Groose, at the beginning of the game, is Link's bully and rival. He also has feelings for Zelda, has a very entitled personality, and is ultimately a coward, as evidenced by the fact that he pens Link's Loftwing to keep Link out of the Loftwing race. But eventually, he grows out of that when he follows Link to the surface, and helps Link by the end. This dude is a living meme for the Zelda series. In fact, he even tried calling this whole thing the Legend of Groose at one point. And yet, what are good heroes without an equally compelling villain? Girahim is by far my favorite Zelda antagonist because of how sinister and persistent he is. He is a force constantly getting in your way, and his power is demonstrated in your first boss fight with him, as he can grab Link's sword by just the tip and he doesn't feel any pain whatsoever. Need more evidence to how evil he is? Near the end of the game, when he finally captures Zelda, he acts all aloof and performs dances worthy of Fortnite dance emotes. And he also does that weird tongue thing. But Girahim isn't just a villain getting in your way. He's a living weapon, a mere puppet to the true antagonist of the game, Demise, aka the first incarnation of Ganon. Though I would have been fine if Girahim is the ultimate final boss that you had to face, given how unique he is for a villain, but that's a minor complaint. In my opinion, there's no other Zelda game that goes deeply into its story and characters other than Twilight Princess. But I think there's one thing about the game that goes deeper than the rest, and that's the music. Every Zelda game has great music, but the music in Skyward Sword stands out, having some of the deepest and heart-racing orchestrated pieces ever made. The calming atmosphere of Skyloft, the feeling of adrenaline when flying in the sky on your Loftwing, the brightening feeling of Faron Woods, the horns and drums that occupy Elden Volcano, the sandy, mysterious vibes of the Lanayru Desert, which also changes to something more modern when you stand in the vicinity of a timeshift stone. Even dungeons have their own unique themes that make them stand out, from the music that plays when you are about to delve into a dungeon for the first time, to the actual music inside the dungeons themselves. My personal favorite dungeon theme is the Earth Temple. Then there's the themes that identify characters. Zelda's Lullaby is obviously the most identifiable. And then there's Girahim's theme, with the mix of a grand piano and an organ at the same time, with the subtle wind chimes that play in the background to send shivers down your spine. And Fi's theme, with the combination of flutes that command your attention, mixing well with the feeling of Fi as not just a spiritual guide, but as a true companion and friend. But the most triumphant theme in the whole game is the main theme, Ballad of the Goddess. This song is brilliant in its own right, but once you train your ear enough, you realize that Ballad of the Goddess is just Zelda's Lullaby backwards. I'm telling you, Koji Kondo is a genius for composing this masterpiece. That's the thing with Ballad of the Goddess. Zelda's Lullaby is just that, a lullaby meant to lull you to sleep. Ballad of the Goddess being the opposite, sticking with the game's theme of awakening. It wakes you up. Skyward Sword is a true love letter to the series, even though the controls leave a lot to be desired. But once you get past that learning curve, you're in for a great time. And if you're one that's not much for long conversations, no worries. With the HD remaster, you can fast forward dialogue and even skip entire cutscenes if you want. I also gotta point out that it can't be a coincidence that the HD remaster came out a year before the Breath of the Wild sequel, which looks to have a bit of Skyward Sword mixed in, with a bit of Princess Mononoke, maybe? I called it, no takebacks. Skyward Sword isn't as polished as other Zelda games, but it has a lot of creativity, and if you're looking for an excuse to go back and play it again, the Switch version is the perfect excuse. If you've never played Skyward Sword before, then the Switch version would be perfect for you, with its wide variety of accessibility options. I give Skyward Sword a 7 out of 10 for the original Wii version, but the Switch remaster earns a solid 9 out of 10. If you pick this game up, just remember that you're not playing any video game. You're playing a Zelda game.